pull one more, and you might be pulling out your own medicine cabinet. Somewhere in your yard sits a plant you've sprayed, yanked, or cursed at more than once. You call it a weed. Genesis calls it something else. After Eden, Scripture says the ground itself would produce thorns and thistles, plants that fight back against anyone trying to grow something else. 12 of those exact plants are still near your front door, and today we're walking through all 12 backyard weeds, stronger than antibiotics, the ones you keep destroying without knowing what they do. Antibiotic resistance kills over 1 million people a year worldwide, and researchers keep turning back to plants like these for answers. One was tested against a drug reserved for infections nothing else can touch. Stay for the last one. Traditional healers believed it called damaged flesh back to life. If any of these are currently dying in your yard from a bottle of weed killer, tell me which one in the comments before we start, because you might be about to feel very differently about your lawn. Weed number 1, burdock root. Most people know burdock only as the plant that ruins a good pair of socks. Its round, spiny burrs cling to fabric, fur, and skin with an almost mechanical grip, so effective that a Swiss engineer named George de Mestral studied them under a microscope in 1941 and invented Velcro from what he saw. But centuries before anyone thought to copy its hooks, healers across China, Europe, and the Middle East were digging up its root instead. Traditional Chinese medicine has used burdock, called Niu Bangzi, for well over 1,000 years, typically for skin infections, swelling, and what practitioners described as heat trapped beneath the skin. Modern analysis has found the root rich in inulin, a prebiotic fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, alongside a compound called arctigenin, which laboratory studies have examined for antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory activity. European herbalists use the root as a blood purifier, a vague-sounding term that likely referred to its actual effect on liver and lymphatic drainage. To prepare it, simmer 1 tablespoon of chopped fresh or dried burdock root in 2 cups of water for 15 minutes, strain, and drink warm once daily. If you're on blood-thinning medication, check with your doctor first, since burdock may interact with clotting. Something built to hitch a ride on anything that passed by has been quietly riding along with human medicine for over a millennium. Weed number 2, mullein. Tall, soft-leaved, and covered in a fine gray fuzz, mullein looks almost too gentle to be useful, which is exactly why most people mow right past it. The Greek physician Dioscorides recommended it for lung complaints nearly 2,000 years ago, and Native American tribes across the eastern woodlands independently arrived at the same conclusion, smoking or brewing the dried leaves for coughs and chest congestion. Mullein leaves contain mucilage, a soothing gel-like substance that coats irritated tissue in the throat and airways, along with saponins and a compound called verbascicide that researchers have studied for antiviral and antibacterial activity. The flowers, meanwhile, have a long folk history steeped in oil and used as an eardrop for ear infections, a practice still recommended by some naturopathic practitioners today, though clinical evidence remains limited. To make a simple tea, steep 1 tablespoon of dried mullein leaf in hot water for 10 minutes, then strain the mixture carefully through a fine cloth, since the tiny leaf hairs can irritate the throat if swallowed. Drink it warm for chest tightness or a lingering cough. Talk to your doctor before use if you have a chronic respiratory condition. Soft enough to double as trail toilet paper, this weed still carries some of the sturdiest medicinal credentials on this entire list. Weed number 3, red clover. Drive past any neglected field in early summer and you'll see it. Pink-purple blossoms nodding above trifoliate leaves, usually growing wherever nobody bothered to plant anything else. Native American healers used red clover for skin conditions and respiratory infections long before European settlers arrived, and by the 19th century it had become a staple ingredient in North American folk remedies for whooping cough and bronchitis. The blossoms are rich in isoflavones, plant compounds including biocanin A and formonatin that have been studied for phytoestrogenic and mild antimicrobial effects. Some laboratory research has examined red clover extracts for activity against certain bacterial strains associated with skin infections, though human clinical trials remain limited compared to the folklore surrounding it. Herbalists have traditionally brewed the dried flower heads into tea for eczema, psoriasis, and general skin support, based on centuries of observed use rather than modern trial data alone. Steep 1 to 2 teaspoons of dried red clover blossoms in hot water for 10 minutes and drink up to twice daily. Because of its estrogenic compounds, avoid regular use if you're pregnant, nursing, or have a hormone-sensitive condition, and check with your doctor first. That patch of clover the bees love so much has been quietly feeding human medicine for at least 2 centuries. Weed number 4, horsetail. This one looks like it belongs in a fossil record, and in a sense it does. Horsetail's ancestors grew as towering trees during the Carboniferous period, over 300 million years ago, long before flowering plants existed. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder wrote about horsetail's wound-healing properties in the 1st century, and by the Middle Ages it had become a standard European remedy for bleeding, swelling, and slow-healing sores. What makes horsetail unusual among backyard plants is its extraordinarily high silica content, a mineral compound that supports collagen formation and connective tissue strength throughout the body. Herbalists have long used horsetail infusions to support nail and hair strength, and some smaller studies have examined its diuretic properties for mild fluid retention and urinary tract support. The plant also contains flavonoids that researchers have studied for antioxidant and antimicrobial activity, though large-scale human trials remain sparse. To prepare it, simmer 1 teaspoon of dried horsetail in 2 cups of water for 10 minutes. Strain, and drink once daily for no more than a few weeks at a time, since prolonged high-dose use has been linked to thiamine depletion in animal studies. Avoid it if you're pregnant or have kidney issues, and speak with your doctor before regular use. Older than the dinosaurs, and still standing in your flower bed, mostly ignored. If a plant this ordinary has been feeding and healing people since the Iron Age without anyone noticing, tap the like button so more people find out what's been growing under their noses. Weed number 5, lamb's quarters. If spinach and quinoa had a wild, uncultivated cousin, this would be it. Lamb's quarters has been eaten across Europe, Asia, and the Americas for thousands of years, appearing in archaeological food remains from Iron Age Europe and in the traditional diets of numerous indigenous American communities long before European contact. The plant is remarkably dense in nutrients, containing more vitamin A and vitamin C per serving than most cultivated leafy greens, along with meaningful amounts of calcium, iron, and protein. Traditional healers across multiple cultures used crushed lamb's quarters leaves as a poultice for insect bites, minor skin irritation, and swelling, likely due to its anti-inflammatory plant compounds. Some ethnobotanical records describe it being boiled and consumed specifically to support recovery during periods of illness or food scarcity, functioning as both nourishment and remedy at once. Cook the young leaves briefly, the same way you'd prepare spinach, since the plant contains oxalic acid that's reduced by heat and shouldn't be eaten raw in large amounts. If you have kidney stones or gout, limit your intake and check with your doctor, since oxalates can be a concern for those conditions. Somewhere between a vegetable and a medicine, this weed has been feeding entire civilizations without anyone bothering to write its name on a seed packet. Weed number 6, shepherd's purse. Named for its small, flat, heart-shaped seed pods that resemble a medieval coin purse, this unassuming plant carries a reputation almost entirely tied to one specific function: stopping bleeding. Medieval European herbalists relied on it as a battlefield remedy, and centuries later, when supplies ran critically short during the First World War, field medics in both Britain and Germany turned to shepherd's purse extract as a substitute for ergot-based drugs used to control bleeding, since ergot supplies had been cut off by wartime trade disruptions. The plant contains flavonoids and an amine compound that researchers believe support blood vessel constriction, which explains its long-standing use for nosebleeds, minor wounds, and heavy menstrual bleeding. Laboratory studies have also examined shepherd's purse extracts for antimicrobial activity against several common bacterial strains, though robust human trials remain limited. Traditional preparations involved crushing the fresh plant directly onto a wound or steeping the dried herb into a strong tea. To make the tea, steep 1 teaspoon of dried shepherd's purse in hot water for 10 minutes and drink up to twice daily for short-term use only. Pregnant women should avoid it entirely, since it has traditionally been used to stimulate uterine contractions. Named after a coin purse, this weed has proven worth far more than the coins it was named for. Weed number 7, common mallow. This one actually has a name in Scripture. The book of Job, chapter 30, verse 4, describes desperate, impoverished people who were forced to cut mallow leaves from the bushes simply to survive, alongside roots dug up for food. That single verse tells you two things. Mallow was common enough to be recognized instantly by ancient readers, and it was reliable enough to keep people alive when almost nothing else was available. Long before modern nutrition science existed, Greek and Roman writers described mallow soup as both food and medicine, prescribed for digestive discomfort and inflamed tissue. The plant is rich in mucilage, a slippery, soothing substance that coats and calms irritated membranes throughout the digestive tract and respiratory system. Some modern laboratory research has examined mallow extracts for antimicrobial and wound healing activity, supporting what those ancient cooks and healers already suspected from experience. The leaves, flowers, and even the small round seed pods, sometimes called cheese wheels for their shape, are all edible and mild in flavor. Add young leaves to a soup near the end of cooking to thicken it naturally, or steep dried leaves in hot water for 10 minutes as a soothing tea for sore throats or upset stomachs. It carries no major safety concerns for most people, though anyone on medication should always mention new herbs to their pharmacist. Desperate people once ate this just to survive, and it had been quietly nourishing humanity the entire time. Weed number 8, henbit. Small, purple-flowered, and often mistaken for a type of clover or mint, henbit spreads across lawns in early spring before most gardeners have even started mowing for the season. It belongs to the mint family, and though it hasn't received the same research attention as its more famous cousins like peppermint or rosemary, folk traditions across parts of Asia and Europe used henbit as a mild fever remedy and digestive tonic. The plant contains flavonoids similar to those found in better-studied mint family relatives, compounds generally associated with antioxidant and mild antimicrobial properties. Henbit is entirely edible, with a mild, slightly peppery taste that works well raw in salads or lightly sautéed like other leafy greens. Some foragers describe it as one of the easiest wild greens for beginners to identify safely, since it has no toxic lookalikes in most regions. While formal clinical research on henbit specifically remains thin, its close botanical relationship to well-documented medicinal mints suggests it likely shares at least some of their gentler properties. Wash the fresh leaves and flowers thoroughly before eating, and introduce it gradually the first time, the way you would with any new wild food. It won't replace a pharmacy, but it may be the most underestimated plant on this entire list, simply because nobody has bothered to study it properly yet. Weed number 9, wild violet. Those small, heart-shaped leaves and purple flowers that pop up in shady lawn corners every spring have a folk medicine history stretching back centuries across Europe and North America. Traditional herbalists used wild violet leaves and flowers for coughs, sore throats, and swollen lymph nodes, often prepared as a soothing syrup made by layering fresh flowers with sugar and letting the mixture sit until it released its color and compounds. The leaves contain mucilage, similar to mallow, along with salicylate compounds, chemically related to the active ingredient in aspirin, which may explain violet's long traditional use for mild pain and inflammation. Some herbalists specifically recommended violet for what they called swollen glands, and modern understanding of lymphatic support suggests there may be a real mechanism behind that centuries-old observation. The flowers are also edible and surprisingly nutritious, containing meaningful amounts of vitamin C, historically valuable to communities without reliable access to citrus. To make a simple syrup, pack a jar loosely with fresh violet flowers, cover completely with hot water, let it steep overnight, then strain and simmer the liquid with an equal amount of honey until slightly thickened. A teaspoon at the first sign of a sore throat is the traditional dose. Wild violet carries no significant safety concerns for most healthy adults in normal culinary amounts. The flower every child has ever picked for their mother has been medicine the whole time. If ancient traditions were mapping out compounds this specific before anyone owned a microscope, subscribe now, because this channel keeps digging up exactly this kind of overlooked plant medicine. Weed number 10, goldenrod. For decades, goldenrod was blamed for allergy season, when the real culprit hiding in plain sight nearby was ragweed, a plant that blooms at the exact same time but produces the airborne pollen actually responsible for most seasonal sneezing. Goldenrod's pollen is heavy and sticky, spread by insects, not wind, which means it rarely reaches your nose in the first place. Native American tribes across North America used goldenrod for centuries before any of this confusion existed, treating it as a trusted remedy for kidney complaints, urinary tract irritation, and wound care. Thomas Edison spent years in the early 20th century experimenting with goldenrod as a domestic source of rubber, successfully breeding plants that produce significant latex content, a lesser-known chapter in the plant's history that had nothing to do with medicine at all. Modern research has identified flavonoids and saponins in goldenrod that have been studied for anti-inflammatory, diuretic, and antimicrobial properties, particularly relevant to urinary tract health. European herbalists have long recommended goldenrod tea to support kidney function and flush the urinary system during minor infections. Steep 1 teaspoon of dried goldenrod in hot water for 10 minutes and drink up to twice daily. Avoid it if you have a known ragweed allergy, since goldenrod belongs to the same plant family, and cross-reactivity is possible. The plant everyone blamed for their allergies has spent centuries quietly treating something else entirely. Weed number 11, Japanese knotweed. Gardeners across North America and Europe consider this one of the most aggressive, destructive, invasive plants alive, capable of cracking through concrete foundations and spreading through the smallest fragment of root left in the soil. In traditional Chinese medicine, where it originated, practitioners have used it for well over 1,000 years under the name Hu Zhang, documented in medical texts dating back to the Tang dynasty in the 7th century, primarily for circulation, inflammation, and infection. Modern chemical analysis explains why. Japanese knotweed root is one of the richest known plant sources of resveratrol, the same compound found in smaller amounts in red grape skins, alongside a related compound called imodin. Both have been studied extensively for antimicrobial, antiviral, and anti-inflammatory activity, and resveratrol specifically has drawn significant scientific interest for its effects on blood vessel health and cellular aging. Some integrative practitioners have incorporated knotweed extract into protocols for chronic tick-borne infections, based on preliminary laboratory findings regarding its activity against certain resistant bacterial strains, though this remains an area of ongoing research rather than settled medical consensus. The root, not the leaves or stems, contains the highest concentration of active compounds, typically dried and prepared as a tincture or decoction by experienced herbalists rather than at home. If you're managing any chronic infection, this is absolutely one to research independently and discuss with a knowledgeable practitioner before use, given its potency and potential interactions. Homeowners spend thousands of dollars trying to eliminate it, and it has been treasured medicine in China for over 13 centuries. Weed number 12, yellow dock. Save the deepest roots for last, quite literally. Yellow dock sends a single taproot several feet into the soil, tough enough that gardeners often give up trying to remove it entirely and simply mow around it season after season. Its connection to the ancient world runs through the tradition of bitter herbs eaten at Passover, described in Exodus 12, built around the idea that bitterness carried a cleansing, purifying function, a belief nearly every traditional medicine system echoed. Yellow dock's deep root is intensely bitter, and that bitterness comes from anthraquinone compounds that stimulate bile production and support liver function, similar to the mechanism found in its close botanical relatives. Herbalists across Europe and Appalachia have used yellow dock root for centuries as a blood-building tonic, largely because the root is unusually rich in a form of iron the body can absorb relatively well from a plant source, historically valued for supporting people recovering from illness or blood loss. Laboratory research has also examined it for antimicrobial activity against certain bacterial and fungal strains, supporting centuries of traditional use for rashes and minor skin infections. Simmer 1 tablespoon of chopped dried root in 2 cups of water for 20 minutes, strain, and drink a small cup daily. Because of its natural laxative effect at higher doses, start small and avoid regular use if you're pregnant or prone to kidney stones. This is the plant that quietly builds blood, and the ones you've met alongside it were never really weeds. They were medicine that never asked permission to grow. None of that means these plants are safe to combine carelessly, or that drying, steeping, and preparing them the wrong way won't strip out the very compounds that made them worth digging up in the first place. A root simmered too hot loses half its power before it ever reaches your cup. A leaf dried in direct sun can lose its potency before you've even picked up the jar. That's the danger nobody warns you about before the next thing you pull out of your own garden, and it's exactly why identifying a plant is only step 1. Step 2 is knowing which of these same principles apply to the herbs already growing at joint height, the ones people reach for out of habit and use completely wrong. That's where we're headed next, in 10 biblical herbs that work faster than medicine,